Hi, I'm Simon. Thanks for tuning in to The Ordinary Filmmaker. Subscribe to get notification of new videos like this one so you don't miss any news, rumors, gear reviews, or tutorials. And a big thanks to Atomos for sponsoring The Ordinary Filmmaker. I'm using the Ninja 5 external recorder for all my studio work as it saves me a ton of time in post. So if you want to speed up your projects in post, consider purchasing the Ninja 5 with my links down below. It also helps support this channel. And now, for a quick recap of this week's news. If you want a full news breakdown on the stories I'm talking about, watch the videos indicated by the picture-in-picture located up here. Canon's slowly discontinuing the EF system. There won't be any more DSLRs, and they've begun purging EF lenses. The EF 200mm f2 image-stabilized USM L series has been discontinued, and we can expect more to follow as soon as Canon releases a flood of RF lenses. NAB 2021 is shaping up to be a big event for Canon this year. Expect to get an announcement on an 8K cinema camera, the Canon R5C cinema camera, and the 100 plus megapixel camera. Now keep in mind that this is all going to be happening in October this year, not April. Sony's doing very well in Japan with sales performance up significantly over the holiday season. Fuji's also doing well, but Canon is down significantly. Now this is likely due to a component shortage or various manufacturing issues which are supposed to be resolved by the end of April. Well, that was until this cargo ship decided to jam up the Suez Canal. Did you know that 10% of the world's shipping goes through the Suez? Just seems like we can't catch a break here in 2021. But there is some good news. Sony announced 3 lenses, the FE40 and 50mm at f2.5 and the FE24mm at f2.8, all $698. Canon will release a 100 plus megapixel camera in 2022 with an announcement, as I mentioned, at NAB 2021. And we might get a few primes as patents were found for the RF14 and 16mm. OM Digital's been busy communicating their plans for 2021 and teasing out a WOW camera. Now, could that WOW camera have a full frame sensor? I don't know. Watch this video to find out more about the reasoning behind why we might get a full frame sensor in the WOW camera. Like staying informed and learning about camera gear? Subscribe and choose all notifications to get notified as soon as I publish a video. But now, it's time to answer your questions. Got a question for next week's video? Post it in the comment section down below, and I might just be answering your question next week. And now, it's time for our first question. Andres asks, I wasn't aware of the fact that you have a full-time job as an enterprise architect. May I ask you why you decided to put in this time-consuming endeavor? Do you enjoy photography and covering the latest news simply that much? I'm curious personally since I also work in IT, and I have a hobby as a photographer. Well, Andres, you're going to take me a bit down memory lane here. When I got the Canon 50D, I was in my 30s. And I just loved what you could do with a camera. I loved the images that I could produce, and I found it just exciting. It gave me an excuse to go outside. And then when I turned 37, I bought myself a Corvette, a red Corvette. Beautiful looking car, and I didn't race it too much. I took it to the track once in a while, but essentially the car to me was an excuse to get out there and explore the world. The camera and the car together had me traveling many places. It had me traveling to Mount Washington in New Hampshire, and what a beautiful mountain this is. You can drive all the way up it, and I probably shouldn't say this on air, but I actually got it up to 3rd gear. It was a lot of fun. Now, I made sure I was the first car in the line so there was nobody ahead of me. And it was a lot of fun. Now, my fear was on the way down what it would be like because, well, it's pretty steep. So you have to know how to drive to get down without burning out your brakes. And here's what I did. I basically put it in 1st gear, and it didn't really accelerate too much. The car more or less kept things right around 20 kilometers an hour or about 12 miles an hour. And there's only a few spots where the car did accelerate a little bit, and then I just tapped the brakes. So if you ever do drive up a mountain, you want to make sure on the way down that you put it in the low gear, and never ever attempt to go up a mountain if your brakes aren't in good shape, because as you can see from this photo here, there's a 2,000-foot drop and there's no guardrail here. It reminds me of an American saying, and it goes like this: you pays your dollar and you takes your chances. So yeah, I paid, I think it was a little bit more than a few dollars, but yeah, I definitely took my chances there. So I was very careful. But the whole point of this is I love taking photos. I love taking videos. And to me, videos is so much more exciting than photos, because photo captures a moment in time. But to me, the video, it not only captures that moment in time, it captures time itself. It captures an emotion. And if you apply the perfect soundtrack to that video, you can feel it. And if you've got the audio set up in your house, in your home theater, right, or you go to the right theater where they're not making it too loud, you know how you get those shivers down your back? And I'm getting them right now just thinking about it. And that's what I love about video. It speaks to me on many more levels. And this started back when I was a teenager. I got an Amiga computer. It was the Amiga 500, and this was one of the first computers ever to give you, well, graphics capabilities, video graphics capabilities. You could edit NTSC video at the time. There was something called NewTek Video Toaster. And I actually was lucky enough to work with a Toaster 4000 while I was in college, and I loved it. I really enjoyed working with video as much as I thought I would. So when I got married, my wife said, you know what, you probably need to get a video camera because, well, our son was on the way. And so, well, I had a Canon 50D, and I thought, well, let's just go to the camera store. And I wasn't an expert. I wasn't a professional like I am today. So I asked them, what should I get? And they said, well, what do you have? I said, I have the 50D. And they were smart enough to realize that I already had an investment in Canon and in certain glass. And they suggested, why don't you just look at the 70D? It's got a new autofocus system. And that was the first camera to have dual pixel autofocus. I didn't really realize it at the time, but that was probably the best camera I could have gotten back in 2013. I think it was October or September, somewhere around then. But that same camera, right around 2019, was feeling awfully old in the tooth, and I was looking at replacing it back in 2016. But again, I didn't want to switch to Sony or anybody else because, well, that increased the cost dramatically because my lenses wouldn't work. So I took a look around and I kept watching the news, following rumors periodically from time to time. That is until 2020. There was so much news coming out. There was rumors of a 90D, and so I was watching it basically every day, twice a day. I was looking at rumor sites. I was checking YouTube. And there was very little. Then all of a sudden, right around September, the news heated up, and I was looking at everything. I was watching every video that came out, and I really thought of getting the 90D. But the thing that stopped me from doing it, no all-I, and they pulled 24 frames per second. So I really had to think of what is Canon's commitment to video. And so I decided not to buy it. But I also had a similar thought. I was watching Camera Conspiracies, Casey, and at the time he was filming, I believe in his mother's home, he'd had part of the room blocked off and he had things set up. And it was a very simple set. And I thought to myself, well, you know, if Casey can do this, he's got a pretty simple set. How hard can it be to set up? So on October the 27th, I decided to pull the plug. I got up, picked up my camera, grabbed my tripod, which wasn't the best, and I started filming. And I think that's the best advice I can give to anybody who wants to start doing this is don't think about it, just start doing it. Don't even worry if you don't have a vision yet. Just try it out, because until you try it out, it's just a dream. But once you do it, especially if you're an overachiever, you're going to look at that and go like, oh, I can do better than that. Let's try this, because now it becomes a way of seeing what the camera can do. You're pushing the camera, not so much yourself. And that's what got me hooked. And very quickly thereafter, I decided, okay, this is where my IT experience came in. And really, I wouldn't say enterprise architecture is IT experience. It's really all about the business. The very first domain we look at in enterprise architecture is business architecture, and that's defining your vision. What is your vision? Do you have a vision? So let's come up with a vision that's a North Star. It's a stake in the future. It's a point to head to. It's very simple, concise, a sentence or two at most. And then I came up with some goals and objectives that I wanted to achieve with my channel. I did a few consultations with Peter Gregg to help me focus. And you know what? Within 2.5 months, I was monetized. And it wasn't because I'm the greatest channel out there. I'm not. Look at my early videos. I'm no better than anybody else starting out. But I had a plan, I had a vision, and that's where I was able to use my enterprise architecture to guide what I'm doing here to this very day. I still have goals. I still have objectives. I measure them. And whenever an opportunity comes up, like if you look at ordinaryfilmmaker.com, a company's helping me with that. They're doing all the hard work. And when I was presented with that offer, I looked at my vision and my goals, and yeah, it fit very well with that. And I don't want to give you too much now, but keep an eye on ordinaryfilmmaker.com because an awful lot is going to be coming to that site. So in the long and short of it, why do I do it? Why do I do it? Well, going back to October the 27th, I was looking at getting a camera, and I looked at the Canon 5D. I looked at everything that Canon was offering, and I didn't like what I saw. As far as video specs goes, there was nothing there that made me happy. So I started looking at Sony, but the A7S III wasn't out. And I said to myself, well, if I go ahead and start a channel, all this time I'm spending trying to find out news and rumors, well, I can actually start to get paid for it. I can learn a new skill. I can spend my time doing something productive, learning new skills, using the camera a whole lot better, making money. And I was hoping at that time to make about $100 to $200 a month, but I figured it might take 8 months to do it. Well, as I just said, I did it within 2.5 months, and by the summer, I had made enough money to buy this Canon EOS R5. And one of the biggest things I look back on is my thanks to you and everybody else who actually spends time to watch my channel, likes my strange sense of humor, that watches every video. Because by you watching videos, it puts money in the kitty that I'm able to use to buy gear, like the teleprompter that I have here, the Glide Gear TMP100. It's a terrific teleprompter. The Manfrotto 504X head tripod. Setting things up was a breeze here today because it's so easy to tilt and pan. It's got resistance, and the only issue I now have is when I set up the camera, if I've been using it for other stuff, is IBIS. And if you've got a camera with IBIS, you'll know this. If not, or if you've just gotten a camera with IBIS, once you put that camera on a tripod, you turn it on, the IBIS will adjust, and if you just shift the camera a little bit, the IBIS doesn't shift as much. And if you're not sure of this, go ahead and turn the camera off, turn it back on, and you'll notice the frame has adjusted. So why does this matter? Well, if you've got something like a Ninja 5, or if you're recording longer videos and you start and stop, once you stop, turn off that camera, it recalibrates IBIS and you're reframed a little differently. So that can be a bit of an issue. But yeah, really good question, Andres. It kind of took me back to the early days when the Amiga really got me into graphics and video. My very first, I would say, DSLR, I'm not going to talk about my other cameras, but that Canon 50D got me exploring. And I think the tool, for me, the camera is more of an exploring tool. And then, of course, the next major change was when I got married and got my son. It turned me into a documentarian. I don't know if that's the right word, but I documented his life. And there's another question coming up, so I'm not going to say any more than that. I probably spent too much time already. I think we're up to 17 minutes, and I've only covered one question. So great question, Andres. Thanks for getting me down memory lane. Greg asks, when recording to the Ninja on the Canon R5, do you still have full functionality of the built-in screen? Do you have the output to both Ninja and R5 screen, and can you use the touchscreen autofocus on the R5 screen? Yeah, a very astute question. I wondered about some of these things myself. What you have to remember is that the R5 provides the signal to the Ninja 5 through the HDMI output port. Now this is output only. It's not bidirectional. The Ninja cannot take over, it cannot control, it cannot pull a Matrix or Borg on the R5 and take over it. So all those questions you asked about autofocus and, well, any of the other settings on the R5, yeah, you can still continue to make adjustments. You can pull focus. You can do anything else you want. The Ninja 5 is just taking that signal out of the HDMI port and recording it. The only thing I would recommend that you do with the R5 is set up a custom mode and make sure your camera doesn't automatically power off after 30 minutes or some other preset time. Set that to disable, set it as a custom mode. You don't want to set it in manual mode because if you do that, you'll probably forget once in a while and you're just going to run your batteries dead. So set it up as a custom mode. And as far as the LCD goes, if you're a one-man show like me, then set it to power off after 30 seconds. There's no need to power the LCD in this case. And of course, I can look at an LCD here, whereas that flip screen, I can't even look at it right now because the teleprompter takes up so much space, it's not viewable to me. So there's another benefit of the Ninja 5. Srijan asks, in Gerald Undun's video, he mentioned that it's possible to have 1080 HQ with the Ninja 5 on the newer Sony cameras. What's your thoughts? Well, that's actually half true. As I just mentioned in the previous question, the Ninja 5 gets its output from the camera that it's receiving. So in my case, I'm sending the Ninja 5 4K HQ, so that's a very detailed 8K oversampled 4K that's going directly to the Ninja. There are a couple of output options on the Ninja 5, and what I choose for most of my work, because I'm very happy with what the R5 provides, is I choose HDMI auto. So whatever the camera is sending in is what the Ninja's recording. But there's one great thing about the Ninja 5, and if you set the output option to on, you can now take that 4K, the camera setting, 4K, and downsample it to 2K. So it's not exactly 1080 HQ, but it's 4K oversampled 2K. So you're getting a 2K video footage, which is a little bit bigger than 1080, so you can crop it in post and you can get a much more detailed image. So if you have a camera, and Sony, all the Sony cameras they have that I'm aware of that came out in the last couple of years, provide you with oversampled 1080. So the A7S III provides you with 4K oversampled 1080, and I believe the A7 III provides you with 6K oversampled 1080. So they provide you with a very detailed and sharp 1080. But Canon cameras don't do that. So if you want to end up with a 1080p file and you don't want to edit 4K and all the hassles with that, that's another area where the Ninja 5 really comes in handy. So you can have your camera provide a 4K output. The Ninja will take that 4K and downsample it into 2K, giving you a much more detailed image that you can use for creating your 1080p project. So in your Final Cut, in your video editor, set your project to Full HD or 1080, that's 1920 by 1080, set the frame rate, and then when you bring in that video, you're going to crop it just a little bit, and you're going to get a very, very detailed signal. RP asks, does your camera have an overheat issue with the Ninja at 4K HQ? No, it doesn't, but I have only been shooting in my studio. When I did the review last year, it was, well, in the cooler months, I believe it was October, so in Canada, yeah, it's not going to be hot enough to worry about overheating. Now, I have recorded over 90 minutes in the studio and not have any overheating whatsoever in 4K HQ. I will be testing this out in the summer, but the one advantage you're getting is you're not recording to CF Express cards or even an SD card, so you're not getting all that heat generated from those cards. All you're doing is getting HDMI out, and the camera's not even recording. It's just taking what's coming off the sensor, so it's working a whole lot less harder. Now, my prediction is that it isn't going to overheat in the summer heat, but until I try it and test out, I really don't know for sure. And I'm also powering the Canon EOS R5 with a dummy battery, and so there's another opportunity there to reduce the heat. Man-Friendly Church asks, a review in a UK magazine says that the Nikon Z7 Mark II feels like a stopgap before we see Nikon introduce all new models. Does this sound reasonable? Well, it sounds like conjecture, it sounds like speculation. And the reason I say that is Nikon came out with the Z6 and Z7 back in 2018. Then 2 years later, they gave us the Mark II. Now, by all measures, these are minor upgrades, but what they did upgrade as far as video and photo goes does take these cameras to the next level. So that makes them very solid cameras, makes them very solid offerings for video and stills. But I don't really see them coming out with a new camera this year. I would say we'd have to wait at least another 2 years before we get something else. What Nikon is really trying to do right now, they're trying to rush out the door their next professional level camera, the Z9. They've made a development announcement for that, so that's very important. But I really don't see any logic, and I certainly hear nothing in the rumor channels about anything to come out with a Z3 or a replacement to these cameras. I mean, they could be, but at this point it's just conjecture. It's what we would call coffee talk. It's just, hey, what do you think? Do you think they're going to come out with something else? And yeah, I've got nothing on that. At this point, I don't think it really makes sense, and it would provide some confusion to their offerings. Now, I could see them come out with a camera that sits between the Z9 and the Z7 and Z6, maybe like a Z8, so it's a little bit higher up. It's kind of like what Canon did with the EOS RP and the EOS R, and then they came out with the R6 and the R5. There's definitely some capabilities missing between the EOS R and the R6, and I could see the same for Nikon. There is definitely a room for a Z8, a camera that sits between the Z6 and Z7 and the Z9. Stop the FOMO asks, are you planning to create an ordinary film where your family is the subject? Or put another way, what film is the ordinary filmmaker planning to make? It's time to go down memory lane. A couple of questions ago, I mentioned that I picked up a video camera back in 2013 or 2014. I can't remember. I think it was 2013. And I started producing my very first video. And it basically was, you're creating clips. You're creating 20-second, 30-second, minute clips. And then I started editing them together. And what I realized the best approach is to do this documentary style. So what you see on the screen is as close as I can get it to the colors that are in real life, as much as I can in 8-bit. and to capture movement as realistically as I can, which is why I choose 30 frames per second. Now, I could have chosen 60 frames per second, with the exception that my camera at the time, the 70D, capped out at 30 frames per second. So that's why I default to 30 frames per second. And so for each year, I have a film showing a day in the life of our family. And now most of this, 80% of it, is actually capturing the life of my son, with a bit more of my wife. And what I'm trying to do is capture a bit more of myself and my wife because, well, as he gets older, he's going to be more interested in seeing the interactions of us, especially when we pass away. So I'm trying to think of way down the road, and even though I don't like being in front of the camera, I'm trying to keep that in mind a little bit. So for every year, I start the films in December, and the reason for that is I live in Canada, and if you know anything about the cold Arctic climates of northern Canada, January is very cold, it's very dark, it doesn't truly get bright until around 9-ish, 9:30 in the middle of winter. And it gets dark right around 4:30, and of course light starts dropping off around 3 o'clock, so you only have maybe about 5 hours of really good light, and that's assuming it's not cloudy. So I thought, what better way to start these movies than December when, well, you know what it's like for children, right? With Christmas, they're all excited, there's the anticipation, there's the build. And then you can use January as an example to have fun, to go out skiing, to go out hiking, to try to find life and explore, and it takes on a different tone. So I am doing these. Now, as far as letting you guys see one of these movies, I'm afraid I can't, and there's a very good reason for that, and it's copyright. Now, I'm not violating any copyright laws. The music that I use in all of these videos, I actually purchased from Apple iTunes. But that license, it's basically for using in my house on my Apple TV or on my iPhone or on my computer. I can't broadcast that. So if I try uploading these, and I actually tried uploading all these videos onto YouTube privately, unlisted, just as a way of archiving them, and in the very first video, boom, 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 copyright notices. And so I decided to pull that off, and I can't put that up there. But stop the FOMO. If you watch behind the scenes, like we're watching right here, I will show you snippets of my family videos of the ones I'm working on. And sometimes I just use them as examples of technology and gear that I'm using. So since I guess about October, I've been using a gimbal in most of my film work because it really gives me a nice, smooth cinematic look. And I've been shooting in 10-bit C-Log. I don't know if that 4 terabyte drive is going to be big enough, so I'm capturing a lot more detail. I'm capturing a lot more detail in the colors, in the shadows, and in the highlights, so that we can capture life as closely as it happens. And I really love that. It's very exciting. And everything I do here, the channel, it all really supports that endeavor, is to produce those family videos, because our memories as we get older, they fade. Like an old movie, they discolor. We make up memories. But to be able to put in those films, especially when he was first born, and be able to see things as they happened, it brings it all back. And they help reinforce the memories that you do have, because what you're seeing on the screen is as it happens. And that's why I don't use LUTs. I want to capture life as closely as it is and as it happens. And I don't mind sharing with you a couple of scenes here and there, as it helps facilitate the story that I'm telling with the channel. But the story I'm telling to you is very different. Now, what I would like to do, once this whole nightmare that we're experiencing in our daily lives disappears and we're able to get out in the public, I would like to do maybe some showings, and maybe we'll meet in the park, we'll ask questions, do Q&As for a private group, and maybe I'll show snippets of some of these family videos as we're doing Q&A sessions. That's certainly something I'm looking at doing, and if you're curious about that, then periodically check in with ordinaryfilmmaker.com, because that's probably where I will surface that. YouTube doesn't really give me a chance to update that stuff, but stay tuned, because ordinaryfilmmaker.com is going to have a lot to offer. So yeah, sorry, I'm getting a little emotional here. You can see I'm all teared up. No, I'm not that emotional, but yeah. Wow, the questions this time around. Wow, guys. Yeah, no, it really touches the heart. And to me, that's what video is all about. It touches the soul. It touches the heart. It sends shivers down your back. It's about capturing the video right, and then using the right soundtrack to really help bring that alive. So yeah, tell me about how do you capture your life, and also I'm very fortunate that when I first started filming, you know, being able to capture 1080p video and high quality video was affordable. If I had had my son when I was younger, you know, I'd be lucky to get SD video, and even then the quality wasn't very good. The Village Mayor asks, if you had a choice to start over, would you invest in a gimbal for the R5, or would you consider a camera rig? There are pros and cons to both in situations like when I'm on vacation versus filming locally. You know, I've thought of getting a rig for a long time, Mr. Mayor, and I didn't want to. For one reason was it was adding more weight, and the reason I call myself the ordinary filmmaker is I'm an ordinary person. You see this. You've visited me many times. I have an ordinary family. I shoot video of my family to capture life as it happens. So everything I do is to try to keep gear to a minimum. I only purchase gear. I only keep gear if it's absolutely necessary to my channel. I was telling you guys about the Falconized light that I purchased a little while ago, and it's terrific. I love it. But I ended up selling it last week because, for one reason, it takes up a lot of space in my studio. I only use it once in a while. And when I'm setting up outside to do a filming, it's just one extra gear that I'm having to bring outside. And I want to keep a more minimalist approach to my channel and to my life. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, Mr. Mayor, I was exhausted. I just had a full work day, and my son said, Daddy, we're going to go feed the geese. And this is at the pond, or it's more of a catchment, but we call it a pond. A couple of streets down, so everyone's asking me, so I go, and I figured, okay, I better get the camera. It's 21 degrees Celsius, or about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So I grabbed my camera. I didn't even bring the gimbal because that was just an extra minute I didn't have because everyone's trying to rush me out the door. So I went down there. Now, realizing I didn't have the gimbal, I was extra careful to hold the camera steady, to brace it against my body. Filming 101, right? Use the gear that you have to the best that you can. And so I framed it against my body, I held it, and I let IBIS take control. And I did a good enough job that in post, I didn't have to use any software stabilization. And, you know, I can see the need for using a rig, and there's a few times where I almost thought of getting it. But again, it does add more weight, and, you know, you put that on a gimbal, and now you've got less space where you can rotate it, because I already put a microphone on, and what tends to happen is the more things you put on it, depending on how you balance that camera with the lens you have on, the mic or the rig can bump up against the housing of the gimbal. Now, the gimbal I didn't purchase myself. I actually bought the Ronin S, what was it? I think it was when it first came out. And I didn't like it. I hated it. It took forever to calibrate. No matter what I did, it always said, you're doing it wrong. And I figured, you know, this was the best I got, so I tried using it, and based on the camera and the lens I had at the time, I really had to hold it out. It was really heavy. It was hard to maneuver. So I sold it 3 days later. I was lucky. I only lost $20 on the sale. But the gimbal, the Ronin, or the Crane 2S, that was sent to me as part of a review, the one you and I actually did together. And you know what? Setting it up was a breeze, and once I started using it, I couldn't believe how easy it was to use. Sure, I was using the R5, so the framing was different. I could hold the camera much in closer, so that certainly helped. But it just seemed a whole lot more intuitive to use. And I never sold it, and I never will. It's a terrific gimbal. I love using it. I use it for the majority of my work right now. And I would highly recommend it to an ordinary filmmaker, but for ordinary folks starting out, what do you need? Well, you definitely need a camera. You definitely need a lens. If you're going to be shooting video outside, you're definitely going to want an ND filter, whether it be variable, whether it's something that screws onto the lens, whether it's something like the adapter that fits onto the Canon R system. And I'd be careful with those too, because you can't put on EFS glass. There's many different filters you can get, but an ND filter to me really, really makes a difference. So you want to get an ND filter. A Ninja 5 is great if you're doing a channel, you're doing event work, but for ordinary filmmaker type stuff, it's not something you need. Now, it will help you get better results, and it's got waveforms and all that stuff that will help take you to the next level. But for a lot of the stuff, you can use the histograms and waveforms in most cameras to get pretty good results. For run and gun stuff, it's not something you need. It's going to add more weight. You're going to put those big bulky batteries that I don't have with me right now on the back of it. But for run and gun, for event work, for studio work, the Ninja 5, I swear by it, it's really good. The next thing I would suggest getting is a really, really good tripod. Something that's built for video, something that allows you to pan and tilt smoothly for the weight of the gear that you're going to be putting on there. You don't need to spend $1,000 on a Manfrotto 504X head an aluminum tripod. You can spend a whole lot less and maybe wait for Black Friday and get a Manfrotto that's normally around $400 for a little bit less, like $200. The next thing, storage. Storage is very important. Now, I'm using a 2 terabyte CF Express card by Angelbird because when I travel to places like France, I don't have to worry about using multiple cards. I can basically, with 4K video, get pretty well everything I want on there, but also you want extra cards. And I use a V90 card for my for the SD slot. Now, you can get away with using V30 cards. You can record 4K 30 and 4K 30 HQ on the R5, no problem. So if you want to keep costs down at the beginning, just use your V30 cards until you got enough money for a CF Express card. I wouldn't even get the V90 cards because they're priced very similar, and if you look at the cost per gigabyte, a 2 terabyte CF Express card by Angelbird is probably going to give you a whole lot better value. But don't drop them like I did. I dropped mine the other day on the hardwood floor and I broke the corner. Thankfully it still works, but that's a $1,400 Canadian mistake, and I might see if I can send it off to Angelbird to see if they might be able to repair it, put it in a different housing, because that is one piece of hardware I don't want to lose and break. And that's another advantage of using the V30 cards. The only problem with the V30 cards, they do take a lot of time to move off the camera, and you certainly can't edit off them, but it'll certainly help keep the cost down. And our last question is from JC. Why does shooting in a log or flat format help preserve detail? What benefit does a desaturated format have to keeping the dynamic range? Now, I understand that it does help, and I use it often, but never actually understood why the flat image is needed for retaining detail. Okay, let's go back to the beginning here, and I'm going to try to break this down and keep this as conceptual as I can without getting into too much detail. So light is focused by the camera's lens onto the image sensor. Now that sensor then converts that light into a current or voltage, and it does so for each pixel. Now the more light, the higher the intensity of the light, the higher the current, and that current is then converted into information, specifically the exposure value, and that's what we're concerned about here. Now most cameras like the Canon R5 record the exposure in a linear fashion, as represented by this image here. Now right out of the camera, the video does look vivid, it looks great, it's got high contrast, and it's good enough for most of us to start editing. But if you look closely at the range between the shadows and the highlights, it's very significant, especially on a sunny day or like this winterscape that I have here. The result on a nice sunny day are that the overexposed areas, well, they're clipped. You basically end up with white. There's no information there. And the dark areas, well, they're completely black, also void of information. And there's no amount of work that you can do in post to fix this. The information simply isn't there. And especially if we're using 8-bit, you've got a scale of between 0 and 255. So those shadows, those blacks, are 0. And the really bright areas that are clipping, well, they're 255, and you can't bring anything back from that. When shooting in 10-bit log or 10-bit C-log, as I do on the Canon, the camera has an awful lot more information to work with. It has more information in the shadows, has more information in the highlights, and of course, because it's 10-bit, it also has a lot more color information. But I can tell from your question that, well, you already know this. The question is, why? Well, instead of using a linear curve, which is more pleasing to our eyes, the log curve shifts the lower and middle parts of the dynamic range into the upper part of the dynamic range, where most of the bit depth is dedicated. Okay, it sounds a little bit technical, right? So, well, what this means is that the shadows, the dark areas of the scene, they're lifted upwards into the midtones and the highlights. And the bright areas, well, they're brought down a little bit. And this is why the footage looks desaturated. So we're taking up the shadows, we're bringing them up, and we're bringing the highlights down. And what this really allows you to do is, in post, is now you can bring those shadows back down to where you want them to be to provide the detail or keep the detail you want. And in the highlights, you can do the same thing. Now, I know what you're thinking. Isn't it possible to raise the shadows without log or lower the highlights without log? And the answer is yes, but in a high contrast scene like this, it would result in the shadows or the highlights getting clipped. You couldn't have it both ways. The only way to increase dynamic range on your camera is through log. Now that we know what log is and why we use it, let's focus on the result. Now, many beginners, myself inclusive, are scared off by log due to the desaturated look and all the effort that we have to go through to get it to look like we shoot in standard mode. Now, I'll explain how to solve this later, but first we need to address 10-bit just a little bit more. Now, in order to get the most detail possible out of your camera, you do want to shoot in 10-bit. Some companies like Canon only deliver 10-bit if you turn on log. And the two really go hand in hand. What's the point of shooting log for additional dynamic range if you're limiting yourself to that information of 8-bit? You see, what log gives you is that extra dynamic range, more detail in the shadows and highlights. 10-bit gives you extra color information, giving you much smoother skies. So when you've got scenes with a blue sky or blue water or anything like a sunset, 10-bit will start to give you a bit of banding, whereas 8-bit just gives you a beautiful, beautiful image without any banding. Now, bringing the footage back to life really isn't so hard, but it does take a little bit of practice, and I'm going to give you the simplest way to do that, and you don't even need to use a LUT. Yeah, that's right. A lot of people out there telling you need a LUT. You don't need a LUT to edit log. And I kid you not, all this footage here was edited without a LUT. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? I'm particularly proud of it. I keep showing this scene here, which was shot in 8K, and I'm very proud of it. And the first thing you have to do is balance the footage. That's very simple. With Final Cut Pro, they have an auto white balance, and I always start with that, and the simple reason is I want to see how the auto white balance looks. And of course, that's how you would select the eyedropper to manually balance it. So once I've selected the auto white balance, I click on the eyedropper, and I find middle gray in the scene. I don't always have a color card with me. In fact, I rarely remember to bring one with me, and like Gerald Undone, I don't wear a gray band on my wrist. I probably should take this Apple Watch and replace it with a gray band, and that would really help me out. But then again, most of the time I'm shooting my son and not myself, so not really. So what I tend to do when I'm out and about shooting is the pavement, believe it or not, or a sidewalk, or the gray pants my son is wearing actually work very well for white balancing. Despite what your software might say, you're not looking for really, really bright white. White will work in the absence of a gray, but you're usually looking for a gray, so find a white area where there's a bit of a shadow and pick that, and you're going to find it gives you the best balance. So I always start with white balance in Final Cut Pro. Next, you want to raise the saturation just a little bit. Now, don't let the wheels scare you off. They let you control the shadows, midtones, and highlights separately, or you can control them all together. When starting out, I would just work with the master level and control them all at once. Address the highlights, shadows, and midtones separately once you're kind of ready for that, or once you see that the master isn't giving you what you need. And once you get to that level, you go like, wow, the master isn't doing this right. Then you're going to appreciate adjusting the shadows, highlights, and midtones separately. And the last thing, use small adjustments and don't attempt this without waveforms visible. It's very important to have the waveforms because what they're going to allow you to do is see if you're clipping or not. And quite often the scene will look really dark and you're going like, okay, I'll just raise the highlights. But if you look at the waveform, you'll see that you're already peaking at 100. And you might see that your shadows are just a little bit above 0. So you can bring your shadows down a little bit, but in that case with the highlights and your scene's a little dark, which can happen when you're shooting in low light, that's when you want to bring up your midtones, and that's what the waveforms will help you do. It'll take away the guesswork. So that's very, very important. And another reason why the waveforms are very important, regardless of how your monitor is calibrated, waveforms and vector scopes will help you see exactly how colors are, how things are showing up, and help you get things right the first time. Now, once you've balanced and desaturated the footage, go back and tweak the colors if needed. Sometimes I find there's a little bit too much green in the scene due to the RGB Bear filter. And this is pretty common in low light scenes on Canon cameras and most likely other cameras too because they're also using an RGB filter. So what I do, or what I use, sorry, slurring my speech here, is I use color curves to drop the green just a smidge. And don't be afraid to play around with these things a little bit. Now what I like to do is sometimes I'll have my project and I'm afraid that I'll start messing things up. So what I do, at least in Final Cut, is I take that project file, I copy and paste it. And it's not going to fill up your hard drive because that project file doesn't contain all the information. That project file contains all the information on the edits you're doing to the video clips that you've already loaded into your project file. So don't be afraid to fiddle around with them. And if it works, then you can copy that back to your project, then go back into that, what I call delete or scratch project, start fiddling around with things, you got it the way you like it, then copy it back. Now, once you get to a certain point and you're happy, then you might want to consider saving some of your presets. But that brings us to the end of another week. And one of the reasons I wanted to end on that one is a lesson learned. So let's go behind the scenes for a little bit, and I've got a few things I want to talk to you about. When I first started filming with the Canon R5, I had a lot of problems, and one of the biggest reasons for me was I was going from a 70D camera to a professional level camera where basically they take away the training wheels and you've got to learn to film. I didn't understand about histograms, I didn't understand about waveforms, vector scopes and all that stuff, but I learned very quickly. And you'll notice that when I'm filming outside now that the exposure is much better. Now the Canon R5 is missing certain capabilities. You don't have complete control over exposure like you do with the Sony. In stills mode, you can choose what type of metering you want, whether it's evaluative, spot, or anything in between. Canon makes those decisions for you. The Sony also allows you to focus on the person, and it will expose the lighting, or expose, period, based on the person's face. So no matter what happens to the lighting in the background, you can clearly see the subject well, and that's really huge. But what is very important when you're filming, and depending on the camera, if you only have a histogram, then what you want to do is you want to make sure that we'll use the example of filming outside on a sunny day. You don't want to have all the information all the way right up against the highlights, because when you're hitting that line, what's happening is you're clipping. And basically all that area is going to be over bright, and you don't want that. And at the other end is the shadows, and you don't want the information jumping up against there. What you should see is more or less a sine curve like this. And what that means is you're properly exposed. Now, in order to do that, this is where I talk about the need of having ND filters, because you're going to find that on a sunny day, especially on a full frame camera, that adjusting your f-stop and your ISO isn't going to be enough. Now, you might get close to what you want, but then you're not going to be able to shoot at f2.8 to separate your subject from the background on a sunny day, not without an ND filter. So you're going to be handicapped to what you get. So that is very important. But then what I realized too is, well, okay, use waveforms, use vector scopes. And the nice thing about the R5 is they also provide waveforms. So waveforms will show you where you're starting to reach a certain IRE level or light level. What I generally do is keep them at 70. And so what I should see when I'm filming is part of my face with the zebras on, letting me know that I've hit that 70 level. But sometimes what I'll do if I'm shooting outside on a sunny day, I'll set them to 90 or 95, and if any of those zebras show up on my face, no. I'm obviously overexposed. But yeah, sunny days can be a challenge with Canon cameras, but that's where the Ninja 5 comes in and really helps. But now when you take it in post, and this is why I shoot all my family videos now in 10-bit 422 with C-Log, because I just get much better footage. I get more detail in the shadows, I get more detail in the highlights. And to really cap off the last question, the reason I shoot in 10-bit 422 in C-Log is because I'm able to see on the television screen when I'm done much closer to what my eyes will see. My eyes are very good at being able to adjust exposure to see more dynamic range, and that's why I shoot in those modes. And of course the colors look really good too. I'm sorry, you guys will hear bangs from time to time. That's because I'm in my studio and I don't have any soundproofing, and it's just the house expanding and contracting. The heat's been off for a little while, that's why I turn the heat up, but sometimes when you turn the heat off, the house cools a little bit, you'll get some of that, and it's better than the furnace coming in, so I do apologize for that. So, getting back to the color correcting, this is something you've just got to experiment with. But what I found was things got a whole lot better once I started using the tools in the camera. And I've said this many times, histograms are a terrible tool for judging exposure. You'll see this as you start to use them more, because nowhere in that histogram does it show you where middle gray is, where your subject is. Whereas a waveform, you can actually see where you are within that spectrum. You can actually use vector scopes to see the strength. You can use false color so you can see IRE levels throughout the entire frame. But if you're starting out and all you have is a histogram, use the histogram. And what you want to try to do is get most of the information sort of centering in the middle, and you don't want any of it bunching up to the shadows or the highlights. With the exception being, if you're shooting at night, guess what's going to happen? Everything's going to bunch up towards the end, but then what you want to make sure you do, you have a light on yourself, expose it properly, and you might want to take a few minutes, bring it into post, see how it looks before you go ahead and shoot the rest of it. All right, the next item I want to talk about in behind the scenes is Spring Challenge. And I got 2 more entries this week. Let me show you a few of these new entries. The first one is from the Village Mayor. And you can tell he lives in Canada. It starts off as very cold, and he even took a little bit of a snippet of me here. And then you can see things starting to warm up, the ice is breaking, and you can see spring is definitely on the way. So I'd like to thank the village mayor for his entry into the Spring Challenge. And this is our second entry into the Spring Challenge. Now, because I was rushing to get this video done, I actually forgot to mention the name of the gentleman in my notes here, so I'm going to flash them up on the screen here. So I do apologize for that, but thank you for submitting your entry into the Spring Challenge here. You're obviously in a warmer climate, and I can see that spring to you is about life's rebirth. You can see your family, and it's got a very warm feeling to that. We're almost at the end of March, which means we're almost at the end of the Spring Challenge. The last day of March is your last chance to submit your entry into the Spring Challenge. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look at all videos again, and I'm going to look for artistic integrity. I'm going to look for emotion, and I think that's the biggest thing that I'm going to look for is the emotion within the video, the story that you're trying to tell. I'm not too worried about the professionalism of your video, what type of camera you're using. I'm looking for the story. I'm looking for the emotion. And I'm going to pick the best 5. Now, right now, I've got 9, so unfortunately, 4 of you at present aren't going to make it any further than that. But here's the really great thing. I don't want to be the person putting my bias too much into this challenge. I'm going to take those 5 entries. I'm going to stop the scrolling here. I'm going to take those 5 entries, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them into a community poll. And I'm going to leave that poll up for, I don't know, maybe 5 days, and then I'll announce it in a separate video saying who the winner is. And then what I'll do is I'll communicate with that person through Facebook. I need 3 bits of information. I'll need your phone number, I'll need your address, and of course your name. And then I'm going to forward that information to Angelbird. And what they're going to do is they're going to send you out a 512 gigabyte CF Express card and an Angelbird CF Express card reader. So that's a really good prize. I mean, I think that has a value of somewhere between $400 and $500. And your odds of winning are pretty good. Right now, you've got a 1 in 10 chance of winning. So if you haven't already submitted your video, please go ahead and do so. And yeah, have your chance to win. The last thing I want to talk to you about in my behind the scenes is Final Cut Pro crashing. Over the last couple of days, I've told you about my experience with the M1 powered MacBook Air. It has 8 gigabytes, it has 512 gigabytes NVRAM or SSD, and it has a 13-inch screen with a 7-core GPU. So I'm going with the lower end model, not the higher end model, because the capabilities I identified for this machine were not video editing, but as a home computer for all family members doing non-video work. So homework, for doing browsing the internet, shopping, anything else you would do that's not video related, especially a lot of photo work. We'd be doing photo work as well. Well, yesterday I actually edited a full video in Final Cut Pro on the M1 Mac. Now, the previous day I had some issues that I mentioned that I couldn't, that were not related to the software or the hardware. It was just me configuring software. Well, yesterday, during the editing of the video, I had 3 or 4 crashes. Now, these weren't doing anything major. Sometimes it was just applying white balance. Sometimes it was just adding a fade to color. These were pretty basic tasks. Now, the software wouldn't completely crash. It would just completely freeze with that, spinning color wheel. And it wouldn't go away, so I'd do a force quit. And at one point, I had just spent about 15 minutes converting to ProRes, loading those clips into Final Cut, placing them on the timeline, color correcting them, balancing them, grading, all that stuff, applying music to it. And what I usually do is I put that at the end of the video, then I select all, I cut, I move my track head to where I want to import them further down in the line because my videos are fully formed. I have the credits already set up for the end of the year because as I go through and add more songs, I'm updating the credits and all that information. So just when I went to paste, it crashed. Yeah, it crashed. So I quickly loaded it back up, and guess what? Those clips weren't anywhere to be seen. I was furious, but I didn't panic. I thought, well, let's see if they're still on the clipboard. So I placed the placehead where I wanted them, and I pasted them, and they went in no problem. So I didn't lose anything. So right now, it looks like Final Cut Pro isn't very stable. I'm just using a basic installation. I am using Final Cut Pro on an M1 Mac. I don't have many plugins installed, and this video wasn't using any plugins whatsoever. So I did a little bit of homework, and I did some searching on the internet, and guess what? On the interweb, I found other examples of people saying, hey, Final Cut Pro is crashing or freezing when I'm doing videos, and there's a lot of YouTube talking about it. I was working with Final Cut, and it crashed. So at this point, I would say it looks like Final Cut on the M1 architecture isn't very stable at all. Not enough that I'd want to use for regular work. I mean, I was working on, what, a 10-minute video, and it crashed 4 times? That's unacceptable. It's pretty rare that I get a crash in Final Cut. Usually, when I do, it's one. Like in a video like this, it might crash once, but it doesn't happen all the time. But what I do like about Final Cut is when it does crash, I've never really noticed that I've lost anything. I've never seen anything, because I'll look at it and go like, oh, that's the last thing I remember doing, and it's there. It's almost like it does what you say, and then it decides to die for whatever reason. So yeah, if you're looking at moving to the M1 platform, you're looking at doing video, you might want to wait a little bit right now. It looks like the system still has a few issues. We probably need a few more updates to the software and maybe the operating system. But that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe for your chance to win 2 Angelbird 128GB AV Pro MK2 V90 SD cards and a dual Angelbird UHS-2 SD card reader. Or you could win a Ulanzi LED light package with accent lights, underwater light, and various other flat panel lights to light your subject. There's a great starter kit for starting your own YouTube channel or for somebody else you know that wants to start their own channel. I'll be awarding these 2 prize bundles once the channel reaches 30,000 subscribers, and then I'll offer up different prizes all the way up to 100,000. Now, once I reach this major milestone of 100,000 subscribers, I'm going to be awarding a brand new Canon EOS R5 full-frame mirrorless camera to one lucky viewer. And on that bombshell, thank you so much for watching The Ordinary Filmmaker. It's always a pleasure to have you here. We'll see you again soon.